This is Paved with Good Intentions, not to be confused with Good Intentions Paving. You are the Mentos to my Diet Coke. Welcome to another episode of Paved with Good Intentions, the show that asks the difficult questions you didn't even think you cared about. I'm Danielle Kessner, Esquire, and this podcast is produced sponsor-free, so thank you for supporting independent artists. And today, we are going to talk about our feelings, and that's something that I love to talk about, our feelings. So if you're a male and you're watching this, you're probably already tuning out, but we're going to talk about them anyway. But first, here's a piece of random trivia. Did you know fungus is neither plant nor animal? It's actually something kind of in between. So aside from being gross, and yes, I don't like mushrooms, fungi are weird little organisms. They're made up of a mycelium, which is a web of tiny filaments called hyphae, or hyphae. I'm using the Latin term. These are pretty much unseen wherever they are set up until they develop fruits like mushrooms or puffballs or truffles or whatever. And they feed by absorbing nutrients, which they do by secreting acids and enzymes that break down any surrounding organic material in which they live in their environment, which I think is just weird. Personally, I'm not a fan. But I do like yeast, which is used to make yummy things like bread and beer. So that's a good thing. And now on to our episode. How are you today? One of the hardest questions that anybody ever asks, and we don't think of it as a difficult question, but it actually is quite a difficult question, which is, how are you today? Or how are you feeling? That's one of those questions that you get a lot. I mean, in fact, anytime it's like a greeting. You say, hi, how are you doing? Like the first thing you do when you interact with somebody is you ask them how they're doing. And it's interesting that this is our first question because in a way it's an insincere question. When you ask somebody, how are you doing? You're asking something that's kind of not the same as what you're actually saying. You're saying, how are you doing? But what you're really asking is just like, in this moment, how are you ready to interact with another person? Because more often than not, when you say, how are you doing, the response is going to be, oh, I'm doing okay, I'm doing good. Sometimes you will get somebody who does say something like, well, things are not so great, they're not all that, nothing's going really all that well. But really only in extreme cases do people say that. And this is, when I'm talking about this, I'm more talking about in present company. So if you're talking to somebody you see you see a friend on the street, or you're, at work, and you say, how are you doing? How are things? You ask that question, and usually the answer you're going to get is semi-sincere, because it's going to say, yeah, this is kind of how I'm feeling right now, but at the same time, there might be some other stuff that they're not going to say, because more often than not, when people ask that question, they're not looking for the deep answer. They're not looking for what somebody is really going through. They're looking for just how are you doing in that moment, or this is just kind of an informal way of showing that we do care. And I'm going to get to that in a minute, but there's a reason why I'm bringing this up, because it seems like such a simple thing. It's like, we interact with people, we say, how are you doing? It is a sign that we do care. We do want to interact with people. It is that kind of social greeting. But why am I bringing it up now specifically? So without getting into too much of the detail about it, there was a shooting that occurred last week in Oregon, a mass shooting. A number of people were murdered in a school in Oregon, which is yet another mass shooting in the United States. And without getting into that side of it, because I don't even want to touch that debate. One of the things that continually comes up whenever there is a mass shooting is the idea of mental health. And this last episode of John Oliver's Last Week Tonight, which if you're not watching that show, I don't know what's wrong with you. Maybe the only reason you're not watching it is because you don't have HBO, but it's actually on YouTube. So, you should watch it. You really should watch it. It's one of the smartest shows on television, and it's actually asking the real difficult questions. I'm a fraud. They're asking the real questions, and they're doing it in a way with humor as well. But watch last week tonight. But anyway, on this week's episode, they were talking about mental health, specifically how mental health is viewed in this country and how it's treated. And, it shouldn't be really shocking considering how many other problems we have going on in this country that mental health is not exactly high on people's list of priorities. And it's just interesting that, watching that episode and then having a conversation with my roommate and actually going back to a conversation I had with another friend over the weekend, kind of about mental health in general. It's something that is not really, it's almost kind of taboo in some ways. And then there's also the aspect of it as, people just don't want to talk about it or they don't want to address it. Whereas it's definitely something that we should be addressing because there's two aspects of it. One, there are people out there with actual with mental or emotional health issues that need treatment, that need care. People who are depressed, that are suicidal, people that have, other inabilities that, will inhibit them on a daily basis, anxiety, with that, I can't think of all of them right now, but I mean, there's actual issues that out there that when we are talking, whenever mental health gets into a debate, it's usually when something bad happens, like a mass shooting. When a mass shooting happens, the first argument is that it's not guns, it's mental health. The problem is that every time we have this debate or every time we bring up mental health after in the wake of a shooting or something, nothing actually happens. We just say, we need to address this. We need to address the mental health, but nothing actually happens from it. But when I'm talking about mental health, I'm not talking about like taking somebody who basically went from, you know, closeted or something that they're, keeping whatever they have inside and then exploding, that because that's less a matter of mental health and more a matter of anger or rage. That's a kind of an emotional response. A lot of those people, they're not actually mentally ill. They are people who are angry, selfish, have a God complex, you name it. But we only talk about mental health when that happens, and so mental health has this stigma that it is something that is, if you say you have a mental health issue, that you are dangerous, that you are somehow impaired, that there's something wrong with you. And yes, there is something wrong, but more often than not, it's something that with treatment and with care and with, the biggest one is compassion, these things can be addressed and we can actually look at that. And it seems like, and John Oliver's episode really pulled this out, this seems like something that is so simple and yet we struggle with it so badly. And when we finally want to discuss it in the wake of a shooting, nothing ever actually happens. Nothing comes of it. And a lot of times what it comes down to is as simple a question as, how are you doing? How are you feeling today? Just how was your day? I mean, these are really simple questions. They're almost cliche questions in a way, but they have a power to them that I don't think people necessarily realize. And a lot of times they don't take it seriously. I know I don't necessarily take it seriously when someone says, how are you doing? And, the reply, I give is like, oh, I'm okay. Even though that day I might be, I may just be like completely blue. I might be sad. I might be depressed, or I might be angry, or, I might be, super happy and there's something I really want to tell somebody, but I don't want to put what is going on in my life onto their shoulders. It's only when you actually can get down into, like you really start talking about it and opening up, and that's when we do actually get that. But opening up is kind of a difficult issue because, I'm someone who listens a lot. Despite my bad hearing and all the metal I'm listening to, I actually am a really good listener. I am one of those persons who will give people the space to talk. And sometimes I just want to walk away slowly and hope they don't notice, but at the same time, I want to give them the attention. I want to give them that recognition because, it's sometimes just the best way for somebody to get to that inner core, to get to those emotions and just, let it out, to vent. We talk about venting a lot. And how many of us ever actually have somebody we can vent to? One of the issues with the mental health in this country, and I know like on my own medical plan, we don't have mental health coverage. And that's something that honestly we need, and we need badly, because you think about where we are as a people, as a society. We have we have such visibility of the world. We see all the problems, and we take all the problems of the world and we stack that on top of what we have in our own lives that are, our own issues, our own concerns, our own fears, everything that's going on in our lives on top of everything else we're seeing in the world. And it's just overwhelming. It's stressful. It's emotional. It makes you anxious. I mean, when people talk about, like all these, conspiracy, all somebody has to do is make one suggestion and suddenly you have anxiety about all the, everything that could go wrong. Tomorrow is apparently doomsday again. So get your tinfoil hats and send all your money to the preacher, because doomsday is coming again. There's so much of this just like out there that is causing people to be anxious. Where do they have to turn when this stuff happens? When you get angry, when you get scared, when you get anxious, you have to turn to somebody. You have to be able to let that out. There has to be somebody who will recognize those fears or those concerns, recognize that emotional torment that you're dealing with, and actually show some compassion, show some sensitivity to it. And, the best way for that is usually a therapist. Um, you know, it's good to have somebody that you can talk to. The problem is though, is that a lot of people can't afford therapy, like a regular therapy. I know when I transitioned, I had, my therapist that I basically saw once a week for, a few months, and it was basically $90 a session. That is, I mean, I could afford it, but it's still a pretty steep price to pay, and my insurance wouldn't cover it. Now, there are insurances out there that will cover mental health, they'll cover therapy, psychiatric help, things like that. They will do that, but not everybody does it. It's one of those things that they can easily cut out. And it's almost as important as physical health, because mental health really does have a pretty profound effect on physical health. If you are stressful, if you are like just, if everything is just anxiety and stress, your blood pressure is going to go up. Your, eating habits might, I can attest to that. Your eating habits are going to, they're going to suffer. You might lose sleep. I mean, there's physical things that can happen when you have these emotional issues. And we're putting all the focus on the physical. We're not putting the focus where it should be, which is on the emotional. And part of that is because obviously we can't all afford it, but the other part of it is that we're not listening to other people. We're not giving people that attention. Now, it's hard because there's some people who they have so much that everything is always negative, or everything is always, it's always venting, it's always unloading, and you can only take so much. Even a therapist can only take so much. But you have to have compassion. You have to give them that recognition, or you yourself have to also say that. It's like, you know what, it's been so hard to, take in all this stuff. I need a mental health day. I need to talk it out. I need to vent. But it's this kind of give and take. And we don't do that very well. And especially now when it's a very me-centric culture, where it's always about selfies and what I'm doing and what's important to me, that it's very hard to get through that and actually hear what's important to somebody else, or what somebody else is getting through. So that when you say, how are you doing? You're not just looking past what they say to what you are going to say. It's actually giving them the proper attention and listening to what they say. But at the same time, we also have to we have to know our own limits. We all don't, not all of us have mental health issues. And those of us who do really, need to have professional help for that. Whether it's just, therapy is professional help, and it's an excellent thing. We don't all need prescription drugs or anything like that to curb these. Some people, some of us do, not all of us do. So, but having that outlet is great. But for the rest of us, we still get those issues. We still get anxiety, we still get anger, we still get stress, we get all that stuff, and we need to have outlets, whether it's venting to somebody, which is, kind of hit or miss whether or not they actually are going to care, or if they're going to give you the attention that you need to really feel that cathartic release of that emotion. But then there's there's other things that you have to do in order to kind of mitigate that stress, mitigate those issues. For me, I talk about being a metalhead. It's something that I wear as a badge of honor, but it's also something that has gotten me through some really, really tough times. There are times where I was on the brink of a breakdown, where I was, extremely depressed, angry, and nothing was working. But then, I would hear a song, and, I remember the song itself was, the song was Perseverance by Hatebreed. When I heard that song the first time, there was something about it that I didn't hear originally, but when I actually listened to the lyrics, there was something about it that just clicked, and it was cathartic. It was this, like, it really let those emotions out. And I know it's a really aggressive song. It's one of those things that a lot of people won't listen to, but when I heard it and when it grabbed me, that's when I knew I had this as an outlet that wasn't an outlet for anger and rage. It was an outlet of actually like inner peace. It was this like kind of weird, juxtaposition of what you would expect when you listen to aggressive music. You think that that's, all about, anger and rage. But for me, it's the opposite. It's actually about calming. It's about, kind of taking that anxiety and that stress in there and, just, warping it in this ball of, aggression, and then just gone. Doesn't always work, but it works a lot. And it's one of those things that I could even say saved my very life. And that's something that people need. They need an outlet. They need something to mitigate that stress. They need a distraction, whether it's music, video games, movies, art, painting, making music, just talking with other people. Like I said, that's kind of hard when, you have to have somebody who's engaged with that, but talking it through, just going out into nature, kind of, isolating yourself, whatever works for you. Some people, it's the opposite. It's going and, getting lost in a crowd, or, people meditating, doing all these things that help your mental health, because it's not going to get any better if we continue to ignore it. And if we only talk about it when something bad happens, we are not actually getting the full issue. We're not dealing with the full problem at hand, which is that we need some severe mental health change. We need something in there, in our systems, something in our culture to address mental and emotional health, because like I said, it's just as important as physical health. You can have all the charts you want that say these are the healthiest states in the country based on, BMI, eating habits, weight, things like that. You can throw all those charts out there. Doesn't matter, because physical health and mental health, one of those actually trumps the other, and that's mental health trumps physical health all the time, and we don't put the attention on it that we need to. So when somebody says, "How are you doing?" or "How was your day?" honesty might actually be the best solution, because if you continue to hold it up and you continue to pent all that up in there, it's only going to make things worse. You have to have an outlet for that mental health. And we as a culture need to start recognizing that on a larger scale. Otherwise, these tragedies will not end, because people don't have the proper outlets. People are not being listened to. The amount of compassion and sensitivity isn't there. So thanks a lot for watching. You can check out more Paved with Good Intentions right here on YouTube or on iTunes and Stitcher. You can also check out my other videos and anything I've ever favorited. You might just like what you find. Be sure to check out my other podcast, Translation, which is found at the link below, as well as on iTunes and Stitcher. And you can visit me on Twitter at Danny Kessner, or you can find me on Facebook. And if you have any questions you'd like me to ponder on the show, send me an email at translationpodcast@gmail.com. I do want to hear from you, so let's be pals. And once again, this podcast is produced sponsor free, so thank you for supporting independent artists. We'll see you on the other side.